Welcome to History of Sarasota's 5 Points. From Sarasota, A History by Jeff LaHerd. In the spring of 1885, when A.B. Edwards was 11 years old, he and his father came upon some strangers in what was the jungle near today's 5 Points. They were men from a surveying company hired by the Florida Mortgage and Investment Company, a Scottish land syndicate that purchased 50,000 acres to sell to their countrymen, and established a state of their own at the southernmost tip of the American continent. The men had set up camp in the woods and were about the task of platting Sarasota. The chief engineer of the group, Richard Paulson, upon seeing father and son with their musket and hunting dogs, declared rather grandly, "We will lay out the town of Sarasota from this hub." The transit line ran from the high water mark of the bay and stopped at the very center of 5 Points. The final plat of the town of Sarasota was developed in Scotland and registered in Manatee County on July 27, 1886. Two persons of the survey team stayed in Sarasota after the job was done. Richard Paulson bought land, built a house, and stayed several years until a job offer sent him away. He kept his property and his intent was to move back, but alas, he could only make occasional trips to Sarasota and never moved back. Lewis Colson, seen sitting in the chair, settled in Sarasota and was a leader of the black community and his church. After the Civil War, settlers moved into Manatee County, including the areas of Sarasota, Philippi Creek, Bee Ridge, Fruitville, Myakka, and Lockwood Ridge. In December 1885, the Ormiston Colony, a group of Scottish, English, and Austrian individuals and families who bought into the Florida Mortgage and Investment Company promise of an existing town with fertile farmland, landed in a wilderness with only a single building and a small dock in view, and the allotted farms miles away. With no living quarters available to them, except for other settlers opening their homes, their vision of a Florida paradise exploded when it actually started snowing. The locals initially think it was ashes from a fire. On top of that, there were no places of worship. Most members of the new colony decided to leave within a month or two. If the colony had only come a year later, many of their needs would have been met. The FMIC, or Florida Mortgage and Investment Company, grubbed the roads, built buildings, put in a boarding house and a fine hotel. The picture shows the structures on Lower Main Street and the boarding house at 5 Points. The company manager was J. Hamilton Gillespie, son of Sir John Gillespie, chairman of the FMIC. This screen shows a blow-up of the downtown area of the plat. The red star represents 5 Points. This is a modern map of the same area. 5 Points was considered the hub of the community. The roads that entered this hub were Main Street, Pineapple Avenue, and Mango Avenue, later renamed to Central Avenue. We will address the history of the street corners in turn and also the history of the 5 Points hub. The streets that have changed names near 5 Points, Mango Avenue is now Central Avenue, and all numbered streets are the old number -6. For example, 7th Street is now 1st Street, and 8th Street is now 2nd Street. We'll talk now about the corner of Mango Avenue and Upper Main Street. A boarding house initially occupied by the builders of the town was started construction in January 1886 and finished late in March. The Sarasota house had a large dining room and about 20 bedrooms and verandas fronting on both Main Street and Mango Avenue. In March of 1886, it was leased to Joe and Rosie Vincent, who operated it year-round. According to the ad in the Manatee River Journal, Joe Vincent claimed the Sarasota house was established in 1884. Two pictures taken of the Vincent family children, one by John Browning in 1886 and the other by Felix Bernard taken earlier, seems to indicate the Vincents had been in Manatee County since at least 1884. As was common, the Vincents could have rented out rooms to visitors in a building they rented until they moved into and managed the FMIC boarding house. Rosie Vincent was a great cook based on newspaper accolades, and Joe hunted wild game, fished, and gardened for the food provided to their guests. He was also a hunting and fishing guide. During the peak season from Thanksgiving to about April, the boarding house was filled for most of the years. In 1899, Rosie purchased the Sarasota house from the FMIC for $500 and later bought some of the surrounding lots. Around 1900, Joe started advertising his real estate business. The children grew up, and the oldest two boys opened an oyster shack, the Vincent Brothers Restaurant, on Harry Heigl's Pier about 1901. Tragedy struck on June 27, 1902. Reports from the Manatee River Journal reprint of a Sarasota article. Sarasota tragedy. Friday evening. We were shocked to learn of the death of Richard Jeffcott, who had been killed by a pistol from the hand of Charles Vincent. It appeared from the evidence brought before the coroner's jury that Mr. Jeffcott went to the Sarasota house in a state of intoxication and sat down at the supper table and soon got into a dispute with James Collins about a boat using bad and profane language. Mrs. Vincent reproved him from using such language. At this time, Charles Vincent entered the room and told Jeffcott to stop such language or leave the house. Mr. Jeffcott left the table telling Charlie to come outside and he would have it out with him, at the same time pulling him along. In the hallway, Jeffcott continually struck at Charlie until he pulled away from him and ran back to near the rear door of the dining room where his mother was. Jeffcott followed him and made a lunge at Charlie when Marshall Vincent hit Jeffcott on the head with a chair, which was followed by a pistol shot from Charles Vincent, who held a pistol in his hand. Jeffcott turned back a few steps, staggered, and fell dying to the floor. The verdict of the coroner's jury from the evidence presented was that Richard Jeffcott came to his death from the hand of Charles Vincent in defense of himself, his mother, and his home. Manatee County was a dry county, meaning that you could not sell alcohol, but owning alcohol was not prohibited as long as the quantity was not too great. A person or business illegally selling alcohol was called a blind tiger. So why was Richard Jeffcott drunk in the first place? Accusations from Jeffcott's brother William seem to indicate Charles and Marshall Vincent got his brother drunk at the Vincent Brothers Restaurant. Historically, other oyster shacks would offer free corned beer with an oyster dinner, so it was possible Jeffcott got drunk there. In any case, C.V.S. Wilson, the editor of the Sarasota Times, and also the town justice of the peace, arrested both Vincent boys for the murder. Charles Whitaker, son of Bill Whitaker, was one of Charlie Vincent's law counsel. This killing led to a meeting about July 14, 1902, to start the incorporation of the town of Sarasota, which was finalized in October 1902. While waiting for the trial of Charles Vincent, Joe and Rosie Vincent decided to sell the Sarasota house to J.H. Lord in 1903 for $3,000 and moved to Tampa. J.H. Lord, a Florida land investor for the firm Weber, Lord & Peck, moved from his Venice orange grove to Sarasota in 1903 because of the railroad running tracks there, and almost immediately bought up 4 of the 5 corners at 5 Points, including the Sarasota house plus numerous other parcels. J.H. Lord leased out the Sarasota house. Note the name of the hotel in the newspaper may not be the actual name, but the nickname or common name it was known by. Since the building had been the Sarasota house for so long, often the articles would list it as such. The name of the Sarasota house changed several times from the DeSoto Hotel, after the original DeSoto Hotel had been renamed to the Belhaven Inn, the Sarasota Hotel, and the Sarasota Inn. Most proprietors came from out of town, usually from the northern states, and managed it for the peak season, November through April, although some managed for 2 or more years. Mr. and Mrs. John Gordon Hart, who had managed the Belhaven Inn in the past, were the proprietors of the Sarasota house when John died. His wife, Mrs. Harriet E. Hart, took over full management. Her hospitality and cooking filled the Sarasota house with guests, and she had to put out tents on the lawn for overflow gentlemen, eventually having to lease part of the Iverson buildings to put up more visitors. So many visitors came that the newspapers were imploring residents to lease out rooms. Mrs. Hart's lease expired in November 1911, and then she became the first proprietor of the newest 2-story hotel built by Mr. Watrous at the intersection of Palm Avenue and Lower Main Street. She called it the Hart Commercial Hotel, and along with the hotel across Palm Avenue, the Bay Villa Hotel, she managed both until she fell ill and had an operation in Tampa, which she never really recovered from. This picture shows the DeSoto Hotel in 1903 to 1909. And here's another view of the same hotel. The original DeSoto Hotel name had been changed to the Belhaven Inn. There were at least 3 DeSoto hotels in Sarasota at one time or another, just not at the same time. In 1909, the name changed to the Sarasota Hotel. At the beginning of March 1915, Dr. Jack Halton implored J.H. Lord to let him use the hotel for the purpose of fighting an eye disease that the local school children had, treating them 10 at a time. After 3 weeks of free services for those that couldn't afford to pay, he leased the hotel, bought new up-to-date equipment, and started the first public hospital in Sarasota. The hospital required donations to keep it running. Bertha Palmer and her son Honore donated $100 apiece. The Women's Club, the next generation of the Town Improvement Society, also helped raise money to keep the hospital going. Dr. Halton may have been too optimistic because by December his debts had risen to such a point he had to abandon the lease of the building and move to the Iverson building to his own private practice. That season, instead of a boarding house, J.H. Lord opened real estate offices in the Sarasota house, his own and the McClellan Park sales office. In May of 1924, J.H. Lord auctions off the Sarasota house buildings and all its furnishings. A month later, he announced the building of the first skyscraper in Sarasota on the previous Sarasota house lot. The first Bank and Trust 8-story bank building was the first skyscraper to start construction, but the second to finish. The Sarasota Hotel skyscraper on Palm and Lower Main started construction later, but finished first. Lord built 15 arcade stores to surround the building on Main and Central, known as the Lord's Arcade. The bank building had 96 steam-heated offices and drinking fountains on every floor. The building and arcade opened in 1925 and was the center for real estate offices in the city during the peak. The first bank and trust went bust on July 17, 1929, paying depositors 18.5 cents on the dollar. A few days later, on July 20th, 1929, the Palmer National Bank and Trust Company opened the same site with Potter Palmer, Bertha Palmer's son, as chairman of the board. Notice the clock hanging off the bank building. We'll see it later when talking about the triangular lot. And here's a picture of the inside of the bank. Palmer Bank merged with Southeast First National Bank of Sarasota in 1976. Notice 5 Points Park in the foreground. The picture must be after the 1991 opening of the park. The plaza at 5 Points was built on the bank site in 2005. The next corner we will talk about is the one bordered by Pineapple Avenue and Upper Main Street. In 1886, after the Scots arrived in Sarasota, one family stayed longer than most, the John Browning family. Members of the family, left to right on the top, were Alex, Edwina, Hugh, Jesse, and on the bottom, Margaret, Jane Kerr, John Jr., and the father John. The Brownings built a house in 1886 about 100 feet from the corner of Upper Main and Pineapple on Main Street. The first Sarasota school was built near the Brownings' house, taught by two sisters, Anna and Sue Whitcomb, relatives of James Whitcomb Riley, the poet. Although the Brownings had left before the Methodist Church was built, the buildings behind the church may represent the old Browning house and the school. On September 15, 1892, Harry Heigl paid $40 for a lot for the Methodist Episcopal Church at 5 Points. The original building, 1893, looked more like a barn than a church. According to the memories of the First United Methodist Church, the Village Improvement Society, led by Mrs. Carrie Abbey, raised money to add a bell, build a belfry and vestibule, erect a steeple, add a double door entry, and paint the church white before 1900. J.H. Lord, by 1910, bought the church lot for $1,600, threw in a lot on Pineapple Avenue, and helped move the church. In August of the same year, the church, minus its steeple, was moved to the lot on Pineapple Avenue. The steeple was never added back. J.H. Lord sold the church lot to parties in West Virginia for $9,000 in February 1912. During 1913, in March, a new Bank of Sarasota building to be built on the old church lot was held up because the construction survey disagreed with the original survey, off by about 2 feet. The judge in the case ordered Sarasota to pick an engineer, would have been the city engineer, the builders of the bank to pick another engineer, and both parties to add a non-biased engineer agreed by both sides. These engineers needed to work up a compromise. The Flatiron Bank building was completed by the end of December 1913. J.H. Lord was on the board of directors for that bank. The Flatiron building held many businesses throughout the years. A fire in 1979 caused a rebuild and a redesign of the building. Some people may remember Patrick's Restaurant in this location, and for a brief period, it may have been the Floridian Restaurant. The last time I looked, it held Fit to Run at the Five Points corner. Next, we'll look at the corner of Pineapple Avenue and Lower Main Street. Harry Heigl, during October 1899, had the Gulf Coast Telephone Company install the first telephone in an old wooden shack at the corner of Pineapple Avenue and Lower Main Street. The second phone was placed at Heigl's dock at the foot of Main Street. The post office was also placed in this building. Mrs. Carrie Abbey, the postmaster, took calls and relayed messages. A new, more powerful telephone system was installed in the wooden shack in August of 1903 when the Peninsular Telephone Company put in a 50-line magneto switchboard. In November 1905, Gillespie moves the post office and telephone building out into the street while he builds an artificial stone building known as the Gillespie Block. J. Lewis Hewell from St. Petersburg was recruited by Gillespie to make concrete blocks resembling stone. When complete, the post office and phone system moved to the second floor of the Gillespie Block. Also, the Bank of Sarasota moved into this building. About 1908, the Badger Pharmacy gets its start here. Dr. Schultz and Mr. S.E. Olson, the owners, were from Wisconsin, the Badger State. This is Gillespie Block through the decades. Top left, the First National Bank moved into the Gillespie Block in April 1915. Bottom picture, though I don't know a precise date, my guess is about the 1920s. Top right shows the Gillespie Block in 1941. In the 1960s, the City Council decided they would raise all the buildings on the south side of Lower Main from Palm to Five Points to supply additional downtown parking. The Gillespie Block, although still sturdy, fell victim. Today the spot is bare and fronts the Zenith building. That leads us to the corner of Lower Main Street and North Pineapple Avenue across from the Triangular Park. The picture shows two houses built by Alfred Grable in 1886. It almost looks like an Old West scene. The one on the left was the home of Mrs. Susanna Bartholomew and her children in 1886, and later became the Broadway House. The building on the right was the town meeting place, which hosted meetings, church services, dances, and miscellaneous community functions. George A. Kaysen moved his store from Myakka to Sarasota into this building in February 1890. A customer of his store, John Fletcher, had written a check for supplies. The bank supporting the check failed, and George Kaysen asked Mr. Fletcher to pay up, which caused an argument, and Kaysen chased Fletcher out of the store with a hatchet. According to the Manatee River Journal, Fletcher came Monday to pay the amount due, that Kaysen refused to draw the receipt until the money was in his hands. Insults were exchanged, and Kaysen went in his store, returning with a double-barreled gun loaded with buckshot. As he came out, Fletcher drew a .44 caliber revolver and fired twice. The first shot missed, the second lodged in Kaysen's back. Then Kaysen fired the charge of buckshot. Only two hit Fletcher, one inflicting a flesh wound under the arm, the second passed under the left lung. Although both injuries looked dangerous, both survived the incident. In June of 1894, George A. Kaysen bought the old FMIC company store building and storeroom near the town dock and across the street from the DeSoto Hotel and moved his business there. Harry Heigl bought the Grable building and opened up his mercantile business. In May of 1899, Heigl sold his mercantile business to W.B. Coursey, J.S. Turner, and S.H. Highsmith, and leased the building to them. A year later, the gentleman moved across the street to the abandoned Whitaker Store building and reformed as Highsmith, Coursey, and Prime. About 1903, J.H. Lord bought the Grable building and lot for $1,500. He leased out the rooms and office space. Sarasota had seen its share of fires to wooden structures. The insurance companies told Sarasota they wouldn't issue policies if the town did not reduce the number of fires. The Tonnelier brothers from St. Petersburg decided to invest in Sarasota, buying lots on Lower Main. They built a 3-story brick veneer building they thought to be fireproof. However, a fire broke out on a windy Monday early morning on March 8, 1915, at J.H. Lord's building on the corner, which proved them wrong. The Sarasota Times reported, "The fire had started in the shoe fixery shop back of the 5 and 10 cent store. Some inflammable material burst and the flames were spread over the floor, and the open door, stairs, and hallway furnished a draft that made exit for those having rooms on the second floor possible only through the windows to the street below. In taking down Mrs. Willis, the mother of the Willis brothers, she fell to the sidewalk and sustained serious injuries. Mrs. Quigley of Bellefontaine, Ohio, was painfully injured by her foot striking a hook on the side of the building, which broke off, driving it through her foot." The Tonnelier building, a 3-story brick structure, 100 by 105 feet, was doomed from the start, for in a few minutes after the roof of the Lord building was on fire, the heat broke the windows and flames made a rapid headway. The first and second stories, with office and cafe on the first floor, were occupied by the Palms Hotel. There were 53 guests in the house. All but 4 had time to get their personal effects out. The proprietors, T. and L. Costello, who but a month before had moved there from Fort Myers, leased the building and put in new furnishings, took what little time they had in warning the guests and escaped with only their night clothing and a wrap. Their loss is $4,200. Only $1,500 was covered by insurance. On the first floor was also the Palms Theater, the Western Union Telegraph Office, Dr. Joseph Halton's offices, the Crescent Pharmacy, Krebel's Barbershop, and Mrs. E.L. Frazier's Bakery. The whole of the Tonnelier block was soon a mass of flames, and wind was high and the heat so intense that the windows in the Gillespie building, the First National Bank, and J. Claude Turner's store were shattered, with everything favorable for the fire spreading to that side of the street, and only the heroic efforts of firemen and citizens who were on the roofs putting out the fire that had caught in several places and keeping a steady stream of water on the front were all that saved those buildings. Had they been frame buildings, they could not have been saved. The Iverson block was the next in the path of the flames. This building, 100-foot frontage on Main Street, 2 stories in height, were fortunate concrete stone with solid walls and no windows on the side. The attention of the firemen were diverted to saving this building, although they had little hopes of doing so. The first store was occupied by the New York store, Phil Levy, proprietor. The Sarasota Times was next. The adjoining store was vacant, and the fourth one occupied by the land broker Baxter Company and Mr. Blackwood's Pressing Club. A telephone message was sent to Bradentown for the fire department from that city to come down. When they came, they relieved the home department. From Buckets and Brawn by Wayne Welsh. The Bradentown firemen quickly discovered, however, that they were unable to use Sarasota hydrants with their hose. The threads on Sarasota's hydrants and hose used Underwriter's standard thread, which was incompatible with the 2.5-inch iron pipe thread used by Bradentown. Sarasota's first fire engine arrived and was officially installed on May 1st, 1915, almost 2 months late for the $100,000 fire. The area lay in rubble for a few years. A.E. Cummer from Cleveland, Ohio, bought the corner lot during March 1921 and started construction of a business building in June and completed it in October. P.H. Levy's New York store moved there in November. Later, the corner building was home to the Sport Shop with John and Ida Levison, owners, and currently hosts the First Watch restaurant. Now for the final corner, the triangular lot bordered by Mango, now Central Avenue, 7th Street, now 1st Street, and Pineapple Avenue. J.H. Lord, acting as the company Weber, Lord and Peck, bought the mostly empty triangular lot about 1903 for $800. Lord had 3 two-story cottages built facing Mango Avenue. The Lord family lived in the one closest to 5 Points and across the street from the Sarasota house when staying in Sarasota. A.B. Edwards lived in the one of the cottages for a while. Lord rented the other cottages. To the left is a 1913 Sanborn map of Sarasota showing the triangular lot owned by J.H. Lord and the 3 cottages fronting Mango Avenue. The top right picture shows the 3 cottages and the bottom right picture shows Mango Avenue looking northward from 5 Points. The cottages are behind the water tower on the left side of the photo. In January 1924, J.H. Lord leased out the triangular property for 99 years to the Gulf Coast Realty Company for $12,000 a year for the first 10 years and $14,000 a year for the remaining term. The lower picture shot during a flag ceremony, probably Armistice Day, shows the Lord skyscraper going up, the 3 Lord Weber cottages, and the first commercial building on the triangular lot. J.H. Lord had the cottages moved from the lot. In this picture, the triangular lot is more developed. The Union Bus Depot is the corner building with buses and cabs parked along Central Avenue. The Lord's Arcade is across the street. Vincent Lowe started Yellow Cab near the bus station. Upper left picture shows buildings on corner of Pineapple and 7th Street, now 1st Street. Bottom left picture shows businesses on North Pineapple, and the bottom right picture is of the Union Bus Station at 5 Points. In the 1960s and later, on the corner of Pineapple and 1st Street, the White Tower restaurant was located. In these pictures, you see its heyday and its destruction. To the right, remember that clock that hung from the bank building? It's now near the 5 Points corner of the triangular lot. For many years before 1924, the triangle lot had been suggested as a town or city park because of its central location. Finally, in 1991, the triangle lot buildings were demolished and the land developed into a park. The second Selby Library opened in 1998 across 1st Street. The first Selby Library, located on the bay, was vacated and was later known as the Gee Whiz Building until demolished recently. the 5 Points hub. By 1891, an artesian well was put in at 5 Points, and a pipe under the road fed the fountain at Palm and Lower Main. At 5 Points, a spigot and watering trough for horses was placed. Think about the settlers coming to 5 Points daily retrieving water for their homes, which had no running water for a decade or more. Gillespie had the water tested in Scotland and claimed it was healthy. In October 1902, the town of Sarasota was incorporated. In April 1903, after the Seaboard Airline Railway had come to town, the town council decided it was time to have streetlights. The council ordered three $3.75 kerosene lights from Knight and Wall Company in Tampa and installed them at the depot at 5 Points and the foot of Lower Main Street. The two pictures show the lamps just outside the Sarasota house, the DeSoto Hotel at the time. Note the two ladies and gentlemen appear to be entering the boarding house. In 1910, after Bertha Palmer and family had visited Sarasota for the first time, the Sarasota Ice and Electric Company was formed, and two electric lights were hung, one at 5 Points and one at Lower Main Street and Palm Avenue. The power company had limited ability and the lights stayed on only to midnight. During World War I, a flagpole was placed in the center of 5 Points, Bertha Palmer donating the flag. This was where Sarasota honored their veterans on Armistice Day with parades and flag-raising ceremonies. The flagpole became a monument honoring Sarasota war victims. A traffic signal light was added at the monument. During 1954, the traffic department deemed the monument was unsafe and it was moved to the Bayfront Park on Gulfstream Avenue and Lower Main Street. The Sarasota War Memorial. The bronze doughboy, or Spirit of the American Doughboy, was added to the monument in 1998. The memorial is just south of Main Street between Gulfstream Avenue and Bayfront Drive. Today's 5 Points. I end this talk with the current picture of the 5 Point hub. Thank you, and we'll take any questions.